Let's move on to our fourth main topic today. Chris, what is our fourth main topic today?
This is from Rizzo Gamer 44. Oh, it's my favorite Muppet. Awesome. Greetings, John. I was thinking about not too long ago, it was revealed to us that RDJ would be coming back in Black Widow. But do we need RDJ and Chris Evans to come back to the MCU? I feel as if RDJ and Chris Evans, their time at Marvel's up. I feel like Marvel just can't let go of the ones that started it all, and they can't accept that their stories are finished. Why do you believe that RDJ will be brought back somewhere down the road? Thanks for answering my question. Well, first of all, do you believe that RDJ is being brought back into all these things?
Well, I think the first thing we got to point out here is that, yeah, there was a story going around that Robert Downey Jr. is going to appear in Black Widow. We don't know that that's a fact, by the way. Let's just be clear about that. He very well may, and it'll probably be because, you know, he was still alive during the time of the time frame that this Black Widow movie is happening. So that's fine. But we don't know for a fact. There's stories going around about that, but let's just be clear. We don't know that for a fact. As we move into this new phase of the MCU, not to use a pun there, as we move into a new era, let's say, of the MCU, the post-Endgame, the post-Infinity Saga, the post-Chris Evans and Robert Downey Jr., Iron Man and Captain America, your two main pillars of the MCU. I think, first of all, let me say this. I think there are several reasons to believe they don't need them. And let me address some of those first before I go into why I think maybe they do. Here's one of the reasons you don't need them. They have built an expansive world. They've built an expansive world in this MCU that goes not now just from one country to another, but from the Earth to the galaxies and the stars above. They've stretched well beyond. Like Robert Downey Jr. and Chris Evans aren't the only movie stars there. Chris Pratt has become one of the biggest stars in Hollywood. Tom Holland, at least for now, Spider-Man is still there. I don't think it's going to be for much longer, but for now, he's still there. He's become a big major star. Chris Hemsworth is still going to be there. Maybe not a lot, but he's there. Benedict Cumberbatch is still there. We still have a lot of, from a talent point of view, we still have a lot of A-list powerhouse talent is going to be there. So that's number one. Number two, the stories have evolved beyond the finite. You know, we started with the finite about, you know, save the country, save the planet. Now we've gone well beyond in space. Their narratives have gone out in so many different directions that even if Robert Downey Jr. and Chris Evans, Iron Man and Captain America were still around, I think a lot of the stories would never have them because they just don't need to be there. So when you look at the way that Kevin Feige has cultivated and grown the MCU, both in terms of talent, the characters, and the narrative, I think you can make a very strong argument that the MCU does in fact not need to have Robert Downey Jr. and Chris Evans there. So there. I believe there's a lot of arguments for that. Now, let's look at the arguments for a second about why they do need them still. The first thing I would point out is this, is what we already said earlier. These are your two most pivotal, foundational characters. I would make the argument that the entire MCU up to this point has been built on the shoulders of those two characters. They have been the driving force narratively. They've been the driving force charismatically. They've been the driving force cult of personality-wise. Everything's really been built on Chris Evans and Robert Downey Jr. Up to the point that as you get into Infinity War and Endgame, one is more of a Iron Man movie, one's more of a Captain America movie, and even then you get into Civil War, all that kind of stuff. Everything has been built around them. But one of the other things I want to point out is this. When you look at the MCU films and the history of the MCU films, as we look at, say, even beyond the top 5, say, look at the top 7 all-time highest, most successful MCU movies of all time, with the exception of one film, they are all led by Robert Downey Jr. and Chris Evans. Let's take a look at it. These are the 7 biggest MCU films of all time. Avengers Endgame. Now, again, that is a huge, ensemble cast, absolutely. But it's mostly built around Captain America and Iron Man. Avengers Infinity War. Huge ensemble cast, absolutely. But Iron Man and Cap. The original Marvel's The Avengers, again, built upon the stories of the first Avengers and Iron Man and bringing all that kind of stuff. Again, another huge conglomerate of characters, absolutely. But let's not pretend like those weren't the two most major characters. Same with Age of Ultron. Then we get into Black Panther, which did not have Captain America or Iron Man. So there you go. You have one. But the next most successful one is an Iron Man movie, Iron Man 3. The next most successful one has Captain's name in the title. It's Captain America Civil War, which also is the secondary leading character was Iron Man, was Tony Stark. As you look, if you're trying to make a case, like I think we talked a little bit earlier, Rob, I talked a second ago about you can make a case for why it doesn't need them anymore. I also believe there's a case to be made by why it does. Not only narratively was it built on them, success-wise, the biggest successes of the MCU have been built on these two guys. And now we're moving into an era where they're rolling the dice a bit. We've got the Eternals, which, hey, Guardians of the Galaxy was a risk and it paid off. This is the same kind of risk, and maybe it'll pay off just as big. Even Hawkeye isn't really going to be about the Hawkeye we know. It's going to be about the transition to this new character. It's Shang-Chi. It's a what-if animation series with a little bit of the familiar dropped in there with Doctor Strange and Thor as well as along the way. But I think you can make a strong argument about why they'll be just fine moving forward, and it doesn't need them. But I also think there's a pretty good argument about why, yeah, they still do kind of need them. And we'll see how this turns out. Rob, if you had to make an argument one way or the other, which one would it be? And what are the merits of the opposite view as well?
Well, I think, look, I don't see anybody having the kind of success that culminated with Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. And the idea that anybody is supposed to sustain that is something they had to move away from.
Excellent point.
There was no way they could continue. They couldn't justify it to shareholders. They couldn't justify it to Hollywood. And I think that what they had to do is basically, as you've pointed out before, they have to start over. They have to build their team back up, you know, to use a sports analogy. And they're going to spend the next couple of years building their team. And I think they're going to try and do what they did in the first place. Remember, when Iron Man came out, it was a risk. No one knew if it was going to work. Robert Downey Jr. had his big chance to come back to Hollywood. Marvel was making a movie about a character that wasn't necessarily top tier, even though I've always kind of thought Iron Man was. So they've gone back, and they've already had this success. They've got all this goodwill, and they're doing some things that are different, new, and unique. Black Widow is a prequel, so if Chris Evans and Robert Downey Jr. show up, and they very well could, it's justified because it's not post-Infinity War and Endgame. So I would buy that. I'd be like, look, they're going to support Scarlett Johansson, and why shouldn't they? Why shouldn't they show up in that movie? What a cool thing for both of those actors to do for their compatriot through 10 years of the Avengers. But what I think we're going to get is, can they match the success of Robert Downey Jr. and Chris Evans? Big, big, big question, John. But I think what they're trying to do is do something new and different with these streaming shows that tie into the Marvel Cinematic Universe so we can get more of these characters that we don't see in the movies. And they're really doing things that are new and innovative, which is exactly what they should do, because they're not expected to have, who could ever duplicate? Can you imagine if somebody expects you to make an Infinity War and an Endgame every year? I'd be so stressed out I'd put a bullet in my brain. I mean, so what they're doing now is, I think, exactly what they should be doing. And while you say that, I'm with you. I don't think that Robert Downey Jr. and Chris Evans will never be seen again in the MCU. But they cannot, out of necessity, rely on the two of them to make their brand work going forward. They just can't, because it's unsustainable. And
you know what? You raise a great point about the level of success they have right now in and of itself is most likely unsustainable anyway, no matter what you do.
Right.
And here's the thing, though, Rob. You mentioned, like, nobody's expecting them to sustain that kind of success. Yes, there are. There are millions and millions and millions of people out there who are just waiting for the next MCU movie to make $700 million and go, oh, it's starting to fail. It's like, what are you talking about? It's a $700 million movie. Yeah, but it's like, I think there are a lot of people out there that think that the MCU is just going to be able to sustain this $1 billion a film thing. And I think we as fans need to start realizing, you know what? This is a rebuilding year. It's like, if a team wins a championship, but then they lose all their star players, and they say, we got to go back to the draft. We got to start developing our young guys, blah, blah, blah. As a fan, you know, we can't expect to win the championship again in the next 3 to 4 years. We're rebuilding. We're going to build back up to that point. And I think we've got a few months here where we as MCU fans and comic book movie fans need to start adjusting our brains a little bit, because I think you're bang on the money with that, Rob. We got to adjust our expectations. It's not going to be the same as Endgame.
You know, and it's funny, John, maybe it's just me, but the fact that Marvel is making a movie called Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, I am deliriously excited that they're doing that. WandaVision sounds bonkers. I mean, Thor: Love and Thunder. I mean, come on. I mean, if anything, they're making me think that they're going to go in this sort of wacky, fun direction, which, I mean, Infinity War and Endgame, loved them both. I adored them both. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. But they're earnest. You know, they're the fate of the universe, and we all have to band together. I want to see a little love and thunder in my life. I've always, since I was like, 11, bring me the love and thunder. And I'm getting it now as a middle-aged man with one foot in his grave. So I think it's great. Bring it on. It's so much fun. What's not to love?
Guys, the question is, what do you think about this? Do you see both sides of the argument? And if so, which way do you kind of lean? Do you lean towards the no, you don't really need to have RDJ and Chris Evans in it argument? Or do you lean more towards the, hey man, look at the track record and what they've been built on? Yes, we do. I think there's a lot of good arguments to be made on both sides. Which side of the argument do you fall on right now? And what are your expectations of the MCU moving forward right now? Jump down into the comment section below and let us know your thoughts. All right.